Everyone in your life thinks you sleep fine. You go to bed at a reasonable hour, you do not complain about it, you don't bring it up at breakfast or mention it to your children or make it anyone else's problem. But what happens between midnight and 4 in the morning is something nobody sees, and nobody would believe if you tried to explain it. Because what happens in those hours is not insomnia in the way most people understand insomnia. You're not lying awake wishing you could fall asleep. You are lying awake inside your own mind, trapped in a kind of thinking that feels nothing like the thinking you do during the day. During the day, your mind is reasonable. It moves from one thing to the next. It solves problems. It lets things go. But at 2 in the morning, your mind becomes something else entirely, something relentless and heavy and impossibly focused on every mistake you have ever made, every conversation you handled wrong, every person you should have treated differently, every choice you cannot undo. And the thoughts do not come one at a time. They come in layers, stacking on top of each other until the weight of them presses against your chest and your breathing changes, and you are lying in the dark with your eyes open, exhausted and wide awake at the same time, feeling more alone than you have felt in years, even though the person you love may be sleeping 2 feet away from you. And in the morning, the whole thing vanishes like it was never there. And you pour your coffee and move through the day, and nobody knows what happened. And you start to wonder whether something is seriously wrong with you, or whether this is just what getting older feels like. I want to tell you that this experience is not a mystery, and it is not a sign that you are losing your mind, and it is not something you should push through or ignore. What is happening to you in those nighttime hours has real explanations that come down to how the brain changes after 60, how sleep itself transforms with age, and how your emotional life processes the weight of everything you have been through. And once you understand those explanations, you will stop blaming yourself for something that was never your fault to begin with. The first thing you need to understand is that your brain does not simply shut off when you sleep. Sleep is one of the most active periods your brain goes through in an entire day, and one of its most important jobs during sleep is something I think of as emotional housekeeping. During the deepest part of sleep, what researchers call slow-wave sleep, your brain takes the difficult experiences of the day, the frustrations and the worries and the small hurts, and the things that upset you, and it works through them, taking the sharp emotional edge off each one, while keeping the memory of what happened intact. Matthew Walker, a sleep scientist at the University of California, Berkeley, who has spent his entire career studying this process, describes it as overnight therapy. During deep sleep, the brain's stress chemicals drop to their lowest point of the entire day, and in that calm chemical environment, the brain is able to revisit hard experiences without feeling the full force of them the way it did when they first happened. By morning, you still remember what upset you, but the sting has been softened, and the things that felt overwhelming at 10 o'clock the night before somehow feel more manageable by the time you sit down with your coffee. Here's the problem. After age 60, this system starts to weaken in ways that most people are never told about. The deepest part of sleep, that slow-wave stage where the emotional housekeeping happens, declines dramatically over a lifetime. Research published in one of the top medical journals in the world has documented that by the time a person reaches their 70s, they may have lost as much as 75% of the deep sleep they had in their 20s. You still sleep, but the quality of that sleep has fundamentally changed, and the brain's ability to finish its nightly emotional work has been seriously reduced. A major study published in 2026 from UC Berkeley confirmed this directly in older adults. The researchers found that the less deep sleep a person got, the more anxious they felt the next morning. And this held true even when they accounted for age, personality, and how anxious the person generally tends to be. In a smaller group they followed over 4 years, the decline in deep sleep predicted a matching increase in anxiety symptoms over time. And here is the part that matters most. The researchers also found that older adults who had more physical shrinkage in the parts of the brain that handle emotions produced fewer of those deep, slow brain waves during the night. And it was that reduction in deep sleep, not the brain shrinkage itself, that actually caused the increase in next-day anxiety. In other words, if the deep sleep stayed strong, the emotional system stayed stable, even in brains that were physically aging. This is why nighttime overthinking after 60 feels so different from the worry you had at 30 or 40. When you were younger, your brain had plenty of deep sleep to work with. The emotional housekeeping system was running at full power. You could go to bed upset about something and wake up feeling genuinely better, not because the problem had disappeared, but because your brain had done its overnight work, filing the experience away with the emotional edges smoothed down. After 60, that system is running on a fraction of what it once had, and the result is that difficult emotions are no longer fully worked through by morning. They stay active in the part of the brain that handles fear and distress, a part called the amygdala. And because they have not been properly processed overnight, they are ready to flare up the moment you drift into lighter sleep or wake briefly during the night. And this is where the second piece comes in. And I want to explain it carefully because it is the key to understanding why nighttime thoughts feel so much more intense and so much harder to control than daytime thoughts. Your brain has two systems that work together during the day to keep your emotions manageable. One is the alarm system, the amygdala, which detects anything threatening or upsetting and generates the feelings of worry and fear and dread that go along with it. The other is the calming system, a part of the brain right behind your forehead called the prefrontal cortex, which acts like a wise, steady voice that looks at whatever the alarm system is reacting to and says, "Hold on. Let's think about this clearly. This is not as bad as it feels. You have been through worse. This can wait until morning." During the day, these two systems are in constant conversation with each other, and the calming system is strong enough to keep the alarm system in check. That is why you can think about a regret at 2 in the afternoon and feel a small pang of sadness and then move on with your day. The calming system steps in, puts the feeling in perspective, and lets you continue functioning. But during sleep, and especially during the lighter stages of sleep that become more common after 60, this conversation between the two systems weakens dramatically. Research from Walker's laboratory showed that when a person does not get enough deep sleep, the alarm system becomes roughly 60% more reactive to negative thoughts and memories, while at the same time the calming system loses much of its ability to step in and settle things down. Think of it this way. During the day, your alarm system rings and your calming system answers the phone and talks it through. At 3 in the morning after poor deep sleep, your alarm system rings just as loudly, maybe louder, but the calming system does not pick up. Nobody answers. And so the alarm just keeps ringing, and every regret and every worry and every unresolved feeling from your entire life has an open line to your awareness with nobody there to say, "This can wait. You are okay. Go back to sleep." This is why the things you think about at 3 in the morning feel so enormous and so impossible to let go of. It is not that you are a more anxious person at night than you are during the day. It is that the part of your brain that would normally keep those feelings in proportion, that would normally say, "That happened 20 years ago, and there is nothing you can do about it now," is not available. You are experiencing your emotional life without the filter that keeps things manageable during waking hours. And after 60 years of living, there is a great deal of emotional material stored in that system. Decades of goodbyes and regrets and unfinished conversations and things you wish you had done differently, and all of it is suddenly accessible in a brain that has no means of quieting it down. There is also a chemical piece to this that almost nobody talks about. Your body runs on an internal clock that controls when you feel sleepy and when you feel alert, and two of the most important chemicals in that system are melatonin and cortisol. Melatonin is the chemical that helps you fall asleep and stay asleep, and research has shown that the body produces significantly less of it as a person ages. Cortisol is the stress hormone, and it follows a predictable daily curve. It drops to its lowest point around midnight, and then begins rising again in the early morning hours, usually between 2 and 4, to prepare your body for waking up. In younger people, this cortisol rise is gentle and gradual, and they sleep right through it without noticing. But in older adults, two things happen at the same time. The body's internal clock shifts earlier with age, which is why so many people over 60 find themselves waking at 4 or 5 in the morning whether they want to or not. And the cortisol rise happens during a stage of sleep that is already lighter and more fragile than it used to be. So you are more likely to wake during exactly the window when your stress hormone is climbing, and when you do wake, you wake into a body that is already chemically geared for alertness and watchfulness, which is the perfect setup for anxious, repetitive thinking. And then there is the content of the thoughts themselves, which brings us to the mental health dimension that I believe matters more than anything else. The reason nighttime overthinking after 60 tends to focus on regret, on roads not taken, on things you said or failed to say, on relationships that ended badly, or years you feel you wasted, is not random, and it is not a coincidence. Erik Erikson, one of the most respected developmental psychologists who ever lived, described the final emotional task of a long life as the tension between looking back and feeling at peace with the life you have lived, even with all its imperfections, and looking back and feeling that too many things went wrong and that it is now too late to fix them. This tension does not only show up during quiet moments of reflection or conversations with a therapist. It shows up at 2 in the morning when the calming part of your brain is offline and the alarm part is fully active, and the brain has no choice but to sit with whatever emotional weight the day's reduced, deep sleep was unable to process. Research published in 2021 on rumination and sleep quality in older adults found that people who tend to replay past events and dwell on mistakes experience significantly worse sleep, and that this relationship holds even after accounting for depression and low mood. But the study also found something that I think is deeply important. Older adults who felt they had someone they could genuinely talk to, someone who would listen without judgment, experienced significantly less disruption to their sleep from this kind of repetitive thinking. Not because the thoughts disappeared, but because the feeling of not being alone with them reduced the power those thoughts had over the night. And this is what I most want you to hear. If the nighttime overthinking is occasional, if it comes and goes and does not define your days, then understanding why it happens may be all you need. Protecting your deep sleep by going to bed and waking at the same time every day, keeping your room dark and cool, and avoiding anything that breaks up your night can make a real difference, because every extra minute of deep sleep you preserve is a minute your brain can use to do the emotional work that would otherwise be waiting for you at 3 in the morning. Talking to someone you trust about the things that replay in your mind, whether that is your partner or a close friend or a counselor, takes some of the emotional charge out of those memories before you go to bed, which means your brain has less unfinished material to struggle with during the night. But if the overthinking has become constant, if it is taking your sleep more nights than not, if the regrets and the worries have grown so heavy that they follow you into the daytime and make it hard to feel anything other than exhaustion or dread, then what you are going through may have moved beyond a normal change of aging into something that deserves and responds to real help. There are specific approaches designed for exactly this kind of nighttime difficulty in older adults, and they work not by trying to silence the thoughts, which rarely succeeds, but by changing the way you relate to them, which is a far more lasting and compassionate solution. The mind that overthinks at night after 60 is not a broken mind. It is a mind that has lived long enough and felt deeply enough to carry a weight of experience that the younger brain never had to hold. and it is doing its best to work through that weight with a sleep system that is no longer as strong as it once was. That is not a flaw. That is the honest truth of what it means to have lived a full and feeling life. And the kindest thing you can do for yourself is to stop treating it as something wrong with you and start treating it as something that deserves the same patience, the same gentleness, and the same care that you would offer without a moment's hesitation to anyone else in this world you love.